Good morning, everybody. We're going to give folks about 1 to 2 more minutes to join us before we get started. So I'm just going to give people about 30 seconds to a minute to join us, and we'll get started. Thanks for everybody who's already here. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Abby Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance. Welcome to our event and our presentation this morning. We are so grateful that you are joining us, and we are so excited for you to see and hear about all that we have been working on. Throughout our organization and throughout the process of developing this report and campaign, which is a new lens to view how we achieve our mission to end the criminalization of youth, we have intentionally made sure that the voices and expertise of those directly impacted are amplified, supported, and employed. I'm a middle-aged white woman. Since those most impacted by systemic, institutional, and economic racism or biases need to be centered in this conversation, I am proud to turn the rest of this conversation over to the rest of our incredible team and special guests. So with that, I turn things over to our Deputy Director, Christina Caranta.
Morning, everybody. Thanks for being here today. My name is Christina Quaranta, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance. Going to have a great morning hearing about our new report and campaign. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ileana.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Ileana Pujos. I'm the Director of Community Connections for the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance. I'll be one of the panelists today, and I'll turn it over to our colleague, Shannon.
Hi, my name is Shannon Hawkins. I'm a Justice Advisor with the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance, and I'm one of the panelists today. I'm going to pass it over to Shanice.
Hi, guys. Good morning. I'm Shanice Petway. I am a Justice Advisor alum and a current graduate of Public Allies. So I'm an alum for that also, and I am going to pass it over to her now.
Hey everyone, mi nombre es Hernán Carvente Martinez. I work at the Youth First Initiative as the National Youth Partnership Strategist, and I'm just happy to be here and supporting the Connecticut team. It's been a long journey, y'all, and so I'm really looking forward to this discussion and the launch itself.
Thank you, everyone. So we're just going to do a quick rules portion for the event. Just going to ask everyone to keep themselves muted. We'll be having a chat box question session at the end of the event. So please put any questions that you have in the Zoom chat box. And if you're watching this on Facebook Live, you can place questions there too, and those will get to us. If we don't get to your question, what you can do is send me an email at christina@ctjja.org, and we'll place that email right in the chat box as well so you can see it. And I'll be sure to follow up with you as soon as I can and answer your question. So now we're going to go back over to Ileana, who's going to talk about our campaign and our report.
Thank you, Christina. So first off, I want to generally thank everybody for joining today's phone call. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a history of who we are and how we sort of got to where we are. So for those who are not familiar, the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance is a public policy and advocacy organization dedicated to ending the criminalization of youth. So the Alliance is comprised of the Justice Advisors. We have 3 full-time staff members, and we have a steering committee of many different organizations that work alongside us. So being that the Alliance's mission is to end the criminalization of youth, right? We've been partnered with the Justice Advisors since about October 2017, really wanting to be intentional about making sure that young people's voices and experiences are included in all this decision-making around juvenile justice. So starting in 2017, as a founding member alongside Shanice, we got the opportunity to really come up with the alliance of how we wanted to make sure that young people were being included in these discussions. So we decided to start doing these things called vision sessions. And the vision sessions are essentially going into different programs or facilities or community spaces and talking with the young people or families that are there and having just a very authentic and raw conversation around like, what could have kept you out of the system? What resources and services do you need while you're in the system or to prevent you from recidivating or going back? And just having conversations about, you know, what do you need in your community? What's not in your community that's present in other communities? And we wanted to be intentional about having these vision sessions and being able to bring more than just our opinions to the different tables that we sat at and the different meetings that we went to. So we continued to do vision sessions going into 2018. And then as a team, we sat down and we're like, great, we've done all these sessions, right? And now how do we share what we've got from our sessions? And even deeper than that, what did we get from our sessions? So we spent some time sorting through all the notes. And that was when we were able to identify the 7 themes of system change that are needed to make sure that young people and families succeed. So when we had the 7 themes, the way that we found that was going through all the notes and thinking, what are the common things that we're hearing across the board, right? What are the discussions that are happening in every session? What does that look like? What is the overall arching theme that we're hearing? And these 7 themes included lack of hope, abuse of authority and lack of trust in the system, economic insecurity, housing insecurity, need for credible messengers and positive role models, trauma caused within communities. And there's always one that I forget, but there's 7 of them. And then we took a bigger picture look at it, right? So now we have these 7 themes. What do we want to do with this? How do we move forward with the 7 themes? And the group decided, you know, being that we were the founding group, some of us were a little older, so we decided, great, we should probably recruit younger people, being now that all the Justice Advisors are ages 18 to 25 for credibility and liability purposes. So we were like, great, bring in this new group. Let's continue doing sessions, building our information, right? So then we had a new group come in, a new group of Justice Advisors. They took a look at the 7 themes and were like, okay, cool, we can continue to do vision sessions, gather more information. But how do we want to talk about the 7 themes and what do we want to do with this? And what do the 7 themes all have to do with, right? Besides racism, because racism is kind of like that underlying theme. The Justice Advisors were sort of able to come together and realize, okay, all these 7 themes have to do with some sort of investment, whether it's a need to invest money, it's a need to invest time, care, love. There's some sort of investment needed in every one of these 7 themes. That led to the creation of Invest in Me CT. We decided we'll put together a campaign highlighting investment, but we want to make it stronger, right? This was early 2019 that we had this conversation. We were like, we want to continue to have these vision sessions. So we continued to do so. Long story short, bringing us into the end of 2019, we had many notes from vision sessions. And we were like, great, let's relook at all of them and let's see what recommendations or what are the asks that we're getting from these vision session notes, right? We already had our 7 themes. We already know these things have to do with investment. What are the demands that are coming out of these conversations? So the beginning of this year, we spent some time sorting through the notes and we're able to identify 10 calls to action. The 10 calls to action are actually highlighted on our report. It's called Ending the Criminalization of Youth, One Investment at a Time. You can find our report on our website. I will say the entire report does really dig deeper into the 10 calls to action, digs deeper into the 7 themes, right? So some of the calls to action are very specific, like removing all youth ages 18 and under from adult or prison-like facilities. And then we have some calls to action that are a little bit more vague, like the state of Connecticut needs to create and implement a plan to address racial and ethnic disparities, right? That one's a little bit more time consuming and more of like a longer goal, a longer term goal. So we have these 10 calls to action. We have our 7 themes. We have this name of this campaign, and we decided, great, how are we going to share this information out? We should put together a report, which has led us to here. We spent some time putting together a report, really just wanting to share what were the things that we got out of these sessions. We wanted to make sure that policymakers, community members, everybody was able to really see what these communities need, right? Because this wasn't a report of our thoughts of what we think we need. This was a report that consists of community needs directly coming from community members, more specifically who live in these heavily impacted communities. So June 25th, 2020 today, we are launching our Invest in Me CT campaign, which we worked so hard to put together. Today is the launch day of our report, which I'm very excited for everybody to read and really dig into. And today's conversation is really based around that. That is a long, very shorter explanation of who we are and how we kind of got to where we are. And yes, very excited for today's conversation. So glad I can kind of give that context.
Thank you, Ileana. So for this morning, we prepared a few questions for our panelists who introduced themselves at the beginning of this event to answer. So we'll go through those questions and I'll be asking them, and then we will have time towards the end of the event for any questions that you all have. We're keeping track of them, so I will then go through those questions as well. But the first question we have for our panel is, what's the importance of youth leading the way in this work? And what does it look like for young people to lead the way? I'm going to direct that question to Hernan, and anyone else who has something they'd like to add is welcome to.
Thanks, Christina. And, thank you, Ileana, for the context. I think I want people to understand that, where the Justice Advisors are now, I had the privilege of being able to see this group start off 2.5 years ago when I first started at Youth First. Well, actually, now we're going on 3 years, right, y'all? So it was 3 years in the making of seeing Ileana transition from being a participant in groups with the Alliance to now being the person leading the group that is trying to engage others who've been directly impacted with the system. And so I just want to be very intentional about uplifting that, right? That the leadership potential of Ileana, Shannon, Shawnee's, like all of these amazing individuals in Connecticut, came about through a direct and intentional effort on behalf of Abby, Christina, and everyone at the Alliance to be intentional about including directly impacted young people and directly impacted people in general. And I myself am someone who spent time in the justice system. I was incarcerated in New York for 4 years and have only been out for 8 years. And in those 8 years, I've seen a huge shift in the field in terms of the need of getting people who've been directly impacted, not just at the table, but setting the agenda and sometimes breaking apart the table and recreating an entirely new one because the previous table was designed only for specific people. And so I've seen this amazing work happen in Connecticut. I've seen all the work that has been happening across the country. And the Alliance and the Justice Advisors are a great example of what we can achieve when we actually let young people lead, when we give them leadership positions, when we hire them on staff, and when we actively build their leadership potential. And so, I think what this means for the movement, not just in Connecticut, but across the country, is this very visible need to do this more often and to do it more intentionally so that we can have solutions that are coming from directly impacted folk, but also more importantly, that young people who are doing this work have an opportunity to lead us into the next wave of transformation and reform. And not even reform, but just a total reimagination of what youth justice should look like in Connecticut and across the country. So, it's a beautiful thing to see. I'm really happy to be a part of this work and to be with all of you. And I'm really, like I said, trying to uplift for everyone who's tuning in the real incredible need to do this more regularly, not as part of like just a project, but as the Alliance is fully embraced. It's a youth adult partnership model. And it's a model that I think is going to carry them forward into a huge amount of other amazing work that's about to come from this report and everything else.
Thank you, Hernan. The next question that we have for anyone on the panel to answer is, how has COVID-19 impacted youth and families?
Hi, so this is Ileana. I want to highlight that I don't think, or you know what, let me switch those choices of words. COVID has definitely impacted a lot of young people and families, right? I think what COVID has done the most is highlight the importance of how many disadvantages our communities have, right? Around health, around education, around incarceration. I think the COVID time has presented a lot of interesting things. A lot of organizations, including our own, have been advocating for more investment and the need to prioritize where money is being spent in the state. And I think COVID has shown us that a lot of things are possible that haven't been possible before COVID, right? And that we actually have a lot of resources and services that we could be distributing and utilizing for our families and young people. And I think post-COVID, whenever it is over, that there's going to be a very high expectation around making sure that we maintain these services and resources that were distributed during COVID. And that weren't on the table pre-COVID, right? So I think COVID has really presented a unique but unfortunate opportunity for young people and families to really, push for the priority and the need for their communities to be invested in. And yeah, I think aside from that, obviously our organization is focused on decriminalizing young people. Those who are incarcerated, I feel like this has presented a very tough time for them. Young people not being able to communicate with their families, not having the resources that they need, being overwhelmed, right? This is a disease that has killed many people. And not knowing if you're able to keep yourself safe, if you're not able to maintain proper healthy guidelines, whatever it may be. I think that's a very scary position to put a young person and a family member in, right? Because these family members are being impacted by whatever their kids are impacted by. So I really think that COVID has presented a lot of good opportunity for conversations around what we can be doing in our state, but it has put a lot of disadvantaged people in very uncomfortable and, life-harming positions.
Just giving a second in case anybody else wanted to answer. Okay, so our next question is for Nisi. Why was it important for you to get involved in this work?
So for me, it was important and still is important for me to do this work, because as it not only affected me as a youth, being set up for the school to prison pipeline, but it also affects and is affecting the families and children in my communities as similar as mine, or in my own community. We often see change from outside sources who don't fully understand the scope of what help is really needed in these communities affected by this, having firsthand experience, and still living in these communities, working towards change in a way that the youth and their families are helped is just as important to me as any other work I may do to better myself. Being from these communities and advocating for them has put me in a position of influence. Not only am I being influenced, I am in return influencing the ones that come after me to stand up and seek change. We have to be the change we wish to seek in our communities, and show and prove so that the youth can see that there is hope.
Thank you, Shanice. So next question is for Shannon, and anyone else who has input on the panel also is invited to answer. But how does race tie into all of these issues that we're discussing here today?
Thank you, Christina. So our focus, right, is investment to prevent youth from being funneled into the system. And we can look at each of our 7 themes and realize the connection between race and our theme. And then when we look deeper into the system, you can notice that majority of the youth that are in the system are Black and brown people that look like me. And it's simply because our communities lack the resources needed to prevent them from funneling into the system. And then when we look and we compare to our neighboring towns and neighboring cities that are predominantly white, you can notice that those communities choose to fund in their youth. They choose to fund in housing, and they choose to fund in school and health and everything that is needed to help prevent youth from funneling into the system. And that's pretty much why their youth aren't funneling into the system as much as ours. And I think that if we fail to realize the disproportionate amount of youth, of Black and brown youth, that are being funneled into the system, we'll never be able to realize that, like, we'll never be able to be like, hey, like something, we need to change something, you know? I think that that's pretty much it.
I'd like to add to that because I feel like this time that we're in, this is really, right, a big discussion that's happening nationally, locally. And yesterday is actually a really good example of this. And a lot of people, when I have conversations with my friends or just people in general, they don't really understand how race shows up on a day-to-day basis. So I really want to just give a quick example of yesterday. There was the removal of the Christopher Columbus statue in New Haven, Connecticut. And there was a conflict between, or really an altercation between those who were there to keep the statue up and those at the time. There was only 2 people who were there to take, you know, advocating to take the statue down. And long story short, if you read about it in the news articles, if you read about it on the media, they don't really categorize it as what it is, right? They cover it up as it was a protest debate, and it was a little, you know, a little dispute. But if you watch the live videos, you see 2 people of color being assaulted, being antagonized, being, you know, brutalized, whatever it is, and no accountability was taking place, right? So let's flip the shoes around. If it was a group of Black and brown people yelling in the face of an older white person, right off the back, they're getting pepper sprayed, maced, something, they're getting arrested, right? God forbid a Black or brown group did what happened yesterday, they would be dead, right? They would either be dead or they would be incarcerated. And that's just the reality that people face being a Black or brown person. And I don't think people at large realize the role that media plays in that, right? How we perceive things, the role that language plays, how racist things really are, right? And you can, like I said, clearly tell that just by how information is shared. The way that they'll describe a fight between a Black and brown person is like juveniles fighting recklessly in the street, versus when it's your white counterparts, it was a friendly debate or argument that cooled down. You know, so just really highlighting how race shows up and what's actually going on today, and the role that we all play in it.
Yeah, I'll quickly add to that. You know, as Liliana already pointed out, the Black Lives Matter movement exists for that very reason right now, right? We're still not at a point in our country where we're actively addressing the issue of race head on. We talk about it in conversations, but aren't comfortable, you know, expressing it, you know, within our own spaces and our own circles. And so I want to be very intentional that, like, even Abby's gesture at the beginning of this was very intentional, right? Like, she as a white woman stepped back and said, you know, I need to let my team lead. My team are people of color who need to be heard more than I do. And that is an action that more leadership, white leadership needs to take. And I think that race as a whole is acknowledged more when we do that and actively uplift that intentionality behind that. So kudos to the Alliance for just being very intentional about addressing that issue head on, and the leadership stepping up and addressing it, not just as a passerby conversation, but as an intentional dialogue that is included in all 7 themes of the report itself.
Thank you all. So next, I'm just going to address or direct this question to Ileana. How do you think investment addresses the issues that we're talking about today? And how do you think the report that we're releasing today addresses investment in communities?
So as folks get the opportunity to read the report, you'll see, as I said earlier, it digs deeper into the 7 themes, right? And how young people describe the 7 themes showing up in their day-to-day lives. The 10 calls to action, right? The recommendations that we put into the report also will be deeper described. But as you read through it, you'll realize, and this is why I always put out there, right? Investment doesn't only mean the dollars. Investing your time, investing your care, investing your love. As you read through the report, you'll realize, like, how do we solve this issue? we invest time in this person, right? They just need time and attention or love. How do we solve this issue? We need to invest money. So I think as we talk about all the different issues that the Alliance tackles that came up in the report, or even issues on the call today, they all need some sort of investment, whether it's divesting from another area and investing in that area, sort of like the police situation going on now, right? A lot of people are pushing to divest police departments, and that's something that we've been asking for, right? We need you to divest from the things that don't need the money and invest in the things that need the resources and the services. So I think all of these things, whether it's race, right, whether it's housing, whether it's economic insecurity, or even removing young people from facilities, they all have to do with some sort of investment. So I think it just ties perfectly into, again, the conversations that we're having here today, the conversations that are had in the report, and conversations even outside of this. I just don't think people necessarily usually tie investment to anything other than dollars. So.
Thank you, Ileana. And now, just going to ask everyone on the panel, is there one thing that we haven't gotten to hear from you all that you'd like to share with the audience today?
I'd like to share just back on the question that I was originally asked. I'd like to say that I feel like the people who are most affected by what's going on should not only be accepted at the tables or in the rooms that these conversations are being held about them, but they should also be respected because they are the ones firsthand going through what's going on. Like, they know before anybody else what needs to be done, where things should be invested, where should we focus more on. They're not the ones that are just sitting there like, oh, I'm going to do this right now, and then I'm going home to somewhere that is not affected by any of what we just talked about. They are living this firsthand, so they should be respected and accepted throughout the entire time this conversation is being had about them.
I want to kind of amplify what Nisi was saying too, right? There's this statement of those closest to the problem, closest to the solution. And I think for legislators and stakeholders, policymakers, whomever, they really need to take a look at the smartest way to go about things, I guess I will call it, right? And the smartest way to go about identifying what your community needs is by asking your community, right? You just got to ask them, what is it that you guys need? You guys live here on a day-to-day basis. You experience this community. So you know what's missing here. And I think sometimes they tend to think that those things are very out of reach, right? But based on the conversations that we've had in the vision sessions, I mean, we've even had people just say, I simply want a roller skating rink in my area because I'm tired of having to drive all the way to Waterbury. Like something like that. Like, it's very little things that these kids are asking for, that families and communities are asking for. And it doesn't take a lot, right? And that saying of like, it takes a village to raise a kid. It does take all of us. And I really think that it's super important that we make sure we prioritize the experiences of those directly impacted and the input from those directly impacted. I feel like those should really be priority and just something to really share with everybody today, because I don't think a lot of people see community members as experts, right? But we all have our own expertise. And where you live, right? You're the expert on that area. You know your neighborhood best. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
And I'm gonna build off of Shanice and Ileana and say that, you know, where Ileana is at right now, or even what I mentioned in the beginning, right? That even though we're all sounding here very polished and you know, are very much ready to be a part of this conversation, I'm gonna keep it real with y'all for a second, right? Like, what the Alliance has achieved has required a lot of effort, right? Like, the youth adult partnership work isn't one where you just partner with young people, ask your community, you know, what do you need? And voila, we come up with solutions. It takes intentional investment in having those conversations and realizing that our communities have been hurt so much by systems. They mistrust systems. They mistrust even groups like the Alliance at first, and young people will call it out when they see it, right? Like, that they don't actively think that some of the solutions that we're providing are even tangible or possible. And I think one of the things that Ileana and her group, the Justice Advisors, have been able to accomplish is breaking down some of those walls of mistrust, trying to rebuild communities' ability to communicate their own issues and their own solutions, but more importantly, has created a space for young people to really heal, to be leaders, to actively participate in the decision-making process of not just policies that affect them, but also to contribute to the next wave of solutions that we need to have, particularly in a state like Connecticut. As I mentioned before, I work at Youth First, and Connecticut is one of 9 states that we work with. And truthfully, y'all, Connecticut is far ahead in the game with having closed its last youth prison, and ultimately now at a place where reinvestment is no longer just a conversation about when, but like literally it has to be happening now. And this report outlines so many things that came about from visioning sessions, came about from Ileana and her team being, in direct communication with young people, but they themselves went through a whole leadership journey just to even get to where they are now to build that. And so honoring that and reminding people who are tuning in that it takes more than just a village. So it takes investments, not just in our communities, but also in some of the leadership. And so Shanice, Ileana, Shannon, thank you for your work, for being who you are, and just for being powerful leaders and taking the mantle and picking up the slack from some of us who maybe have not been doing such a good work at protecting our community. So thank you to all 3 of you for doing the work that you do.
Okay, I have 2 things I would like to add. I'll keep them short because after I add these 2 notes, we'll move on to the chat box. But before I add my pieces, Shannon, I don't want to take space if you wanted to add in any last words.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the 2 things I want to bring up, the first one is this morning, the Hartford Courant reported that there was a 16-year-old shot and killed. And the way they wrote that was juvenile shot and killed. And so that's problematic in terms of using the word juvenile. So we tweeted out saying, why did you use this word? And they changed juvenile to boy. So if everybody just sits and thinks for a minute, and just tying this back to Ileana's comment before about how the media speaks about Black people, people of color, it's really important and it impacts us all. And especially think about that young boy's family and friends, right? Is that how you want to read about somebody that you loved and cared for? I don't even know him, and that was something that was offensive. So I think that's something for the media to be mindful of. And that's something for you as a consumer of media, if you see something like that, to shout that out. Write to the editor, put a tweet out, a Facebook post, something to say, hey, we're watching, you can't do this anymore. There's that. And I just want to touch on the piece, the question that we talked about, how has COVID-19 impacted youth and families? And Ileana spoke about this really well. And she mentioned that even before COVID-19, as the Alliance, we've been asking for investment in communities, intensive wraparound services for young people and their families, and giving them the resources that they need, right? And we didn't even have all of that before COVID-19, and now it's especially obvious, and it's really problematic. And we've done a couple other Zoom conversations about this, so I won't go too in depth, but it should be brought up again that there's still young people sitting inside cells inside of the Department of Corrections, whether you're looking at Manson Youth, where young men are held, or York Correctional, where young women are held. And that's the 2 facilities where you go when you're incarcerated, when you're charged as an adult, when you're 15 to 18, right? So they're in there. Last I checked, and don't quote me, but around maybe 43 young men in Manson, 2 young women in York, right? And the way that they're dealing with COVID-19 is lots of time in cell time, right? So 16 to 23 hours a day, we'll go closer to the 23 hours a day, right, of not being able to come out of your cell and have time on your unit or even outside or in school or to see a mental health clinician, right? That doesn't happen right now. So we have been advocating since March that young people need to be released with resources, right? And if we look inside of who is inside of Manson, who's inside of York, who's inside of detention or in the Regents facilities that the judicial branch runs, they're Black and brown faces, right? So this all ties back to, okay, where's that investment in those families and communities and young people? Why are they still in there? Do they need to be? Why is education lacking? Why is mental health resources lacking? you know, all of that. Why is this okay? Why is there not enough soap for them to maintain all the sanitation that we're allowed to, right? How come they're not allowed to socially distance? So I just also want to uplift that, you know, when I quickly mentioned judicial branch, so they have detention where you're held for a shorter amount of time. And inside of those detention facilities are region secure. So that's in Bridgeport and Hartford. And that's where young boys go when you're charged as a juvenile, for lack of a better word, as a young person in Connecticut, right? That's where you're held if you're not charged as an adult. They have been doing a better job, but to highlight what we need from judicial and also the Department of Corrections is we need those community services, right? Other states and counties and cities have figured this out. There's plenty of examples. We need that investment, and Ileana highlighted that. We need it now. We needed it before, and we definitely need it now, right? We need to have the intensive wraparound services, and if we don't, that's just showing where our priorities are, right? I just wanted to highlight that point for everybody so people don't forget. There's still kids sitting inside of cells today while we're all sitting inside of our houses. And just to hold the media accountable, please. So let's just take a second. I'm gonna tap over to my Google Doc where I have all the questions neatly placed for me from the chat box. If you do have questions while the panel is answering, please feel free to keep inputting them into the chat box on Zoom or into the Facebook Live that we have happening. And again, if we miss your question, we are sorry, and I will do my best to answer it. My email's in the chat box. So I'm just gonna go through, I will ask the question, and then anybody on the panel obviously is welcome to tap in and answer it. And if you need support, you know that I'm here. So we have our first question, and we've got a thank you to all the panelists. Question: given that racism is so embedded into the fabric of our society, what are some steps that we can take to amplify voices and promote diversity in the fields that will make sustainable change? So some of the examples here are in the media, with police and law enforcement, with teachers, with legislators, with policymakers. What steps do you think that they can take to lift up voices, sort of like, dare to say it, the Alliance has done, right? What do y'all think?
So I think there's multiple ways, and I'm glad that they listed different examples of like places where, right? So I think in organizations and workspaces, obviously giving them leadership roles, right? So being able to, as Hernan was saying, really just uplift the leadership and the success of people of color who don't necessarily get to be put in those positions. I think in schools, and it kind of just goes the same across the board, right? With policymakers, with teachers, whomever it is, you need to be able to treat them the way you would treat everybody else. I feel like that's really just the answer, right? The way that you would treat a younger white person coming into the space, that's how you need to treat these younger people of color or older, whatever age. And I think that really just realizing that it's not easy. So one of the things that Hernan touched on was that it took a lot of work to get to where we are now. This isn't something where it's just like, let's gather young people, go talk to other young people, and then that's it. It's a one and done. It takes a lot of work to do this. It takes a lot of consideration, needing to acknowledge the fact, I mean, we work with 18 to 25-year-olds. It's hard being 18 to 25. Being 22 myself, like living life as a 22-year-old is very hard. Adulting is hard. And then realizing being 22, how many things I didn't learn before now, right? How many things that my friends learned in school that I didn't necessarily learn in my school. It kind of sets you back. So just realize that not everywhere is everybody is at the same point, right? And back to the investment, you need to make sure that you're investing time in people, and investing your resources, investing your privilege, right? If you got privilege, recognize it and use it to make sure that you can uplift the power of others. I know a lot of people see at the protest, I mean, you see most of the white people go stand at the front, right? Acknowledging their power and recognizing it and using it. Just being able to recognize in what ways you can help and take advantage of that to help others.
I'd like to add on to Ileana, what she was saying. Like Hernan touched on earlier, he was saying like, sometimes you have to dismantle some of the tables and start over. For the tables that we can't dismantle, it's time for people to just, like Ileana said, use their privilege. Like if not to discredit or be rude to anyone's age or race. 70-year-old white men or white women sitting on this border at these tables, it's time for them to step down and make those positions or those spots, those places open for people that are Black and brown, who understand firsthand what's going on, who need to be at these tables and be in these positions where they are in those leadership roles to be able to make these changes and speak up, and their voices be amplified and be able to be heard when it's in the places that needed to be heard.
That's right. Thank you both. And I want to uplift both Ileana and Nisi's points of, we don't want to join anyone's table. We're building a new one, right? So we're coming in and we're building what we need and what the communities and families and young people need. Great point, Nisi. And just a reminder for people, another way to amplify voices, promote diversity, whether you're talking about in the media, so that's contacting them and calling them out when their reporting tactics are less than desirable and often racist and disrespectful, right? It's making sure that when the legislative session comes up, and even now, paying attention to the issues in your communities and contacting your legislator when you see something that needs change and being vocal about that. Also saying thank you when your legislators do something that is responsible and that is moving your community and your state forward. There'll be, I'm sure, because there's always is, lots of different bills this legislative session coming up that are talking about juvenile justice and criminal justice. Since last session ended abruptly, there were different bills that talked about teacher diversity and how will we make that a thing in Connecticut, because it's not. And there were lots of pieces of that bill that were very important and were fantastic. So keep your eye out for that and make sure that you write testimony. And if you can, go to the public hearings, have your face be seen and your voice be heard, right? And just make sure that you're having these conversations and talking with people about why it's important to have a whole range of people making the decisions and getting others' opinions. Next question. So let's talk about, panelists, can you please talk a little bit about exactly what type of community services need to be expanded and who would be delivering those? So that could either be, what did you hear in the vision sessions, or what do we know from research and talking to families?
I wanted to really touch on education. I know that in our Black and brown communities, our education system kind of sucks. I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to be worked on. Our kids aren't getting the proper education, and when they funnel into the system, they're not getting the proper education there either. There's simple things like that. I oftentimes compare our education to 5 steps away on the sidewalk over in Fairfield or Trumbull, and the education is completely different, and the kids have completely different advantages, and the kids aren't funneling into the system for the simple fact of their education system. So I would say that that's one of the biggest things that, community-wise, that we can start on and start working on if we really want to end the criminalization of youth.
I would add to that, being that I actually got the chance to participate in all of the vision sessions, I think something that we heard across the board, right, was 2 things. One, young people were saying that a lot of the resources and services that they had that did work are no longer funded or just don't exist anymore, right? So a lot of young people mentioned loving places like CJR, Connecticut Junior Republic, and I think probably more than half of the sessions we went to, young people mentioned CJR. If I could be in a space that's like Connecticut Junior Republic, it's just so much better for me, right? We have staff that cares for us. They don't practice punitive measures, right? They make sure that they help us grow. They're interested in our success. Young people can sniff BS from a mile away, right? So when they have a staff member that they know is actually committed to them, and they can tell that you're committed to the success of that person, that is something that it's like a trust builder, right? I now trust you and I want you to help me. A lot of what people don't realize is a lot of young people, especially those in inner cities, don't really have that kind of support at home for whatever reason it is. So just when they're in different spaces, like Shannon said, as schools and stuff like that, the people around them schools is a primary example. The people in the schools are, you spend most of your childhood in school. And those are the people that you see probably more than you see the people at home. So just recognizing like the impact that you have on the person that you are with, whether it's mentoring, whatever. Young people really just were pushing for the need to like have what we consider credible messengers, right? So a credible messenger is somebody who has a credible message to share. So for example, I'm pretty sure all of us on this panel are considered credible messengers because we've all had some sort of experience with the system. And whether that was firsthand or secondhand, we have that credible experience. And young people talk about really just wanting to be able to access credible messengers, right? They want to be able to talk to men who are in similar situations as them, or females that are in similar situations as them. A lot of stuff like that. And then like not a one size fits all program. A lot of young people mention being in spaces where it's like they have a set structure of how they do things, right? You're going to take this test and then we're going to put you in one of 3 categories. And when you get there, you'll get one of 3 services. And then this is when you'll be done. All people have different needs. There isn't a one size all fits system that's going to work. So just really recognizing that we need to provide individualized services for these young people, which takes more work, right? Investing more time, investing more care into it, but it needs to be done. And it's something that was brought up in almost all the sessions.
I'll add, I think, from not just the Connecticut context, but nationally as well. I think one of the things that is really important, not just the theme of restorative justice, but really focusing in on services that actively provide healing spaces for people in general, right? And some of that doesn't have to be all programmatic, but that it actively requires us to do more direct investments into community centers where people can come and just be and exist, and actively even, I say this as a 28-year-old male, formerly incarcerated, young dad who actively, just for the first year now of my life, in the last year, have been in therapy for a year and have done a ton of crying and healing. And I think that part of what is really important about highlighting that personal experience for Connecticut is the need for us to create more spaces for young men of color and even young women of color to be able to come and cry and be loved and supported. And I think that there's no right way to program that or to create a nice little space for that. It just needs to be a direct investment in the community and in the spaces where young people particularly, congregate and come together. And that doesn't happen by, creating some other space that's miles away that's not even accessible to them. And so, really finding spaces that maybe are local to young people that can be built up and really supported to be that space where young people can come together and get all that support. And I don't want to call it the mental health aspect of this, right? I think even the mental health sector is a little bit, lacking in terms of cultural diversity and also just cultural competence when it comes to the dialogues that are had with young people. So really investing in bringing in more counselors and therapists and psychiatrists who actually represent or come from the communities where young people are from, and actively investing in some of that as well for a long-term healing process that's required in all of our communities.
Thank you all. So our next question is around the legislative process. And those of you on the panel that have participated with us during legislative session time and the prep time, you can speak to this, or you're all welcome to, So how do you think that we can make the legislative process more accessible to youth and families? Because I see Ileana smiling. Because we all know how public hearings work, and those are not accessible to youth and families and to most adults, frankly. And just quickly, how a public hearing works is you get, I think it's 5 days notice, and that could include the weekend of, hey, a public hearing is coming up. And what a public hearing is when a bill is introduced, if the committee decides to have it be heard, right, the bill comes before everyone, you can go and read testimony, which is 3 minutes long, which starts and ends with a bell, and you go up and you're able to say why you feel a certain way about a bill and give your opinion. Maybe the legislators will ask you questions, then you sit down. Now, this could take all day because you have to sign up. And so there's either getting there, let's say 8 o'clock in the morning and signing up on a piece of paper, and then whatever number you get is when you go, or fun thing, they have a lottery. So then whatever number you're picked at, even if you were first, even if you slept outside, you were ready at 5 a.m. to go inside, you could be number 100. You'll be there all day. So let me just bounce it over to Ileana, who I know wants to answer this, of how can we make the legislative session and public hearings more accessible to youth and families and people?
So I think there are many ways to do this. As Christina was saying, the public hearing process is out. It's unbelievable. You have to think the amount of people who are actually able to get to Hartford, the capital, to go and testify during the day, right? You can sit there. As Christina said, sometimes you're sitting there at 8 o'clock in the morning. You don't know when you're going to go. People can't take time off of work. Some people don't have childcare. Some people don't have transportation. That's not something that's accessible for everybody in the community. If they were to move the capital to New Haven, that would probably be easier for people to get to. That would be a great way to make it a little bit more accessible. But it's not something that's realistic for families and community members to get to. Now, legislators and people who live in the surrounding cities of Hartford, it's very easy for them to get there. It's a quick drive, right? And that's what they do for a living. They're there to listen anyways. They have to be in the building, so they can go hang in their office, and then they know when they're next, right? Legislators know, I'm gonna go hang in my office. I'll be back to do my public hearing when it's my turn. Like, we don't have that luxury of doing that. And not only that, what Christina did leave out was legislators get an unlimited amount of time to speak. They don't get the 3 minutes, right? So what gives you the privilege to speak for 30 minutes, right? Knowing I might have to go back to work. I might have to go pick up my kid. I have to sit here and listen to you until you feel like you decide you want to stop talking, right? So technically, if a legislator really wanted to be, whatever you would call it, mean, they could talk for hours and put everybody on pause and leave everybody there sitting for the rest of the day. So I think it's a very unfair system. The fact that you only get a 5-day notice when a public hearing is coming up, that doesn't even give me enough time to take off from my job. So how am I supposed to make it there? And yeah, sometimes it's embarrassing, and I'm thankful for people like Robin Porter, Senator Gary Winfield, Tony Walker, because the public hearings that I've been to, they've been there, right? And one of the things that I love about them is when they see a young person or a directly impacted community member speaking, they always ask questions. And if they don't get to finish their statement in those 3 minutes, they'll tell them, can you please finish? And that's them, right? Checking their privilege. Like, I know I have the power to give you the time to finish and say what you really need to say. And it's legislators like that are just really needed. And yeah, the system, the way that works just really needs to change. It's not fair at all. And it's very hard to just even attend one. So.
Thank you, Ileana. Just looking for our next question. So with COVID-19, folks are proposing to have distance learning be the main way that young people are educated. Do any of the panelists want to chime in on why that's a problem?
I do. Ever since we transitioned over into distance learning because of COVID, I've had a problem from the beginning, just because, just thinking from perspective of living in an inner city and not having Wi-Fi all the time. Growing up, I didn't have Wi-Fi all the time. I didn't have a laptop. My parents both work, so if I were a student right now during COVID having to do distance learning, I would not benefit at all. One being, I wouldn't have the resources I need. I wouldn't have a laptop. I wouldn't have Wi-Fi. My parents would both be at work, so it'd all be on me and me making sure that I get up every day and I'm getting to work and I'm doing the things that I need to do. Also, there are a lot of youth and like students who are home right now with no food and not even any shelter. So there has always been an achievement gap within the education system for Black and brown youth, but I feel like now with COVID, it's gotten a lot bigger just because of simple things like these, of like not having Wi-Fi, not having shelter, not having a parent at home to make sure you're getting up every day and getting on your computer and doing your work, not having food. It's like the little things. I think that our youth are, Our youth are struggling because of this, and I follow a lot of people on like Instagram and stuff who are teachers, and they're constantly like talking about how majority of their students are failing because they're not getting on and doing their work. Some kids forget to hop on and do their work. Some parents will rather tell their kid, like, go outside or go play the game than sitting there behind them and stressing them to finish their work. So I think that's a really big problem, and I do not like it. And I understand that that's what we have to do because of safety precautions, but I feel like there needs to be a better way to implement this to make sure that kids are, one, getting the education they need, because I feel like when we go back into being back in the schools, kids are not going to know anything, you know? Summer just started, and I'm sure no kid is reading a book or no kid is studying or learning all the things that they have to. They're just not getting the proper resources that were needed and that they were probably or could have gotten a little bit in school, but being at home on the laptop is not going to work for them.
Thank you, Shannon. Another piece to highlight in the bigger picture of education and juvenile justice is we know that research shows if kids are not engaged in school, not going to class, they're not going to school, period, there's a direct connection to the juvenile and criminal justice system, right? Because they're going to be out on the streets, maybe getting caught up making some bad decisions, or they're in school and they're not in the classroom, so they're in the hallway and the school resource officer catches you, right? So it's important to be meeting young people where they are and giving them the resources that they need. The other piece to education, quickly, that I'll say is we have to pay attention to, I see a lot of chatter about how long this is going to last for kids that are not incarcerated, right? But what about young people who are in the Department of Corrections, who are maybe receiving packets for education? And when I say a packet, I mean, like a stack of paper. Here you go, slid through the slit in the cell door, right? And who learns that way? And we know that a lot of young people have special education needs, right? So if you're handed a packet, how well do you think that you're going to be able to complete that, actually learn new information and feel proud of yourself? You're not going to be able to. So we have to figure out a different way right now for how to educate. I understand young people who are not incarcerated, but also what about those who are? Because packets or even nothing is not enough, right? So there needs to be some effort of virtual learning. Something needs to happen that's different because this isn't working. And there's just so many passionate people about young people on the outside and what are they doing and what's happening and are they getting educated and are they getting behind? What about, really what about young people that are incarcerated? And this goes back to, this was a problem before COVID-19 and how education was happening in Connecticut for young people who are incarcerated or spending time in detention, right? So don't forget about those young people when there's these bigger conversations and long form articles about education for young people in Connecticut that are not incarcerated.
I'd like to quickly add, because I seen Sarah Egan had commented in the chat box and mentioned that these are all issues that should be addressed in a special session, right? So kind of going earlier to what Christina said, this year's legislative session was pretty much put on a halt once COVID presented itself, and then just ended on time as it should have without anything actually happening, right? Because the Capitol was closed for a while, COVID was going on, all of these issues. So the opportunity to propose and pass new bills this year is no longer on the table. And I think one of the things that we should really be pushing for is a special session, right? Them creating a session sometime this year to really address these issues, because all these things are things that need to be addressed immediately. We talk about, even earlier, I know somebody brought up, I believe it was Nisi, Connecticut can arrest a kid as young as 7 years old. And this legislative session, they were supposed to be proposing a bill to raise that to 12. Imagine how many kids under 12 are probably going to get in trouble between now and next legislative session. So I just really think that that's another way for people to really be involved in this work and keep up with what's going on. A legislative session is a big deal, and it's very sad that we do not have one this year and we're not able to propose all of these different bills and solutions for all the issues that we're facing in the state.
I'm just going to say quickly that we brought up earlier on this call that a lot of us and a lot of our friends and family are passionate about the Black Lives Matter movement right now, but that needs to continue on through the summer, I mean, for forever, but all the way until November when it's election season, right? And we're picking who's going to be representing us at the legislature. And Black Lives Matter, that slogan is directly tied to all of the pieces of our report where we're asking for investment, right? So Black Lives Matter also means invest in education, housing, nutrition, make sure that people are economically stable, stop over-policing Black and brown neighborhoods. All of that is the same thing. And I've been having conversations with people about how do we keep the momentum? What's going to happen? People love Black Lives Matter now, but how do I translate that into actually all of the needs that people have? And I think our report is a good way to talk to your friends and your family and your colleagues and give people the momentum and the education and the energy that they need to keep going. Because Black Lives Matter means all of the things that we've been talking about today. And just please don't forget that. I'm just looking over for another. So a question that we have, how many white legislators have visited young people who are incarcerated? Yeah,
I don't think I know. I don't know this answer.
Right.
That answer, I don't know.
I see Representative Walker holding up maybe a number, but oh, 0. So, okay, one of the big pushes that we do as the Alliance is if you are going to be legislating and creating laws, you need to go in and see what's actually happening inside of these facilities, right? And a lot of our partners and champions in juvenile justice and criminal justice, a lot of those, you know, Senator Winfield, Representative Porter, and Representative Walker have been inside of those facilities and had conversations with the young people, even during COVID-19, right? Conversations over the phone of, how are you doing? What do you need? Senator Winfield, a couple of years ago, brought a cell to the Capitol, if I'm not mistaken, to show people what solitary confinement really is like, and maybe that's like 10% of it, what it's really like, because you could actually leave. But obviously, kudos to him, because people don't understand. But the answer, as far as we know, is 0. So another push for people is to call on your legislators to say, hey, this needs to change. I need you to ask to go inside of Manson Youth Institute or your correctional or inside of the Regions units and see what these young people are dealing with before you decide that you want to pass legislation to, you know, lower the age of when kids could be charged as adults or whatever it is. People need to see what's happening. I'm going to mute because probably Eliana has something to add.
No, but this reminds me of something, and I'm gonna pass it over to Hernan, because I think there's when I think of like who actually goes into there's a certain narrative around young people in those facilities, more specifically the adult system, right? People look at them as more serious offenders. So I kind of want to ask Hernan to tap in. I feel like you have a lot to say about that. So I'm gonna pass the baton.
Thank you, Eliana. Yeah, I think, you know, even for some of the young people, and this isn't just an issue in Connecticut, but across the country, right? We're comfortable closing youth prisons to a certain extent now. It's no longer a radical idea. I think people are buying into it. But we're still not comfortable with this narrative around the young person who actively might have committed a violent felony. And I'm saying this as someone who, 28 years old, now a person who has a bachelor's degree, is a dad, is like in therapy, everything that I mentioned before. But at 15, actively took a gun and shot a rival gang member 3 times with the intention of taking his life away. So I want to be very clear that who I was at 15 and who I am at 28 didn't come about because of the system, right? Like the first person that ever believed in me wasn't a system. It was a literal educator in the prison that I was at. And it is sad that the first person that believed in me and actually saw me as a human being, that I had to meet that person while in prison. And so I want to like really uplift that narrative, right? The need for us to rethink our entire approach to our response to violence when young people commit violent acts, and really addressing the root causes of why that harm happened, right? Like grew up in like a very abusive household. I grew up around alcohol, cocaine, addiction. I grew up as someone who experienced sexual abuse when I was younger, and this is like the first time I put it out there publicly. And so I just want to be very honest and intentional that our young people are causing harm at some points because they've been harmed themselves, and we don't actively approach that narrative from that angle. We actively talk about it as if the young person is that worst mistake or the worst thing that they did. And we dehumanize them 100 different ways. And yes, I'm talking about all young people. You know, I'm not just trying to be exclusive of a couple of them and just saying that only a couple are capable of change. If we actively do work on the premise that only some can change and not all of them, then all of our policies and our work will actively only be supporting some and not all. And I think we need to actively approach this work from a place where we're actively believing that every young person is capable of change. And if you're in this work and you don't have that mentality, you need to really take some time to reevaluate that, because I wouldn't be where I am today, being able to support the amazing leadership of young people in Connecticut, had I not had all of the supports that I had. And a lot of them didn't come from people in the system, or some of it did, and they actively had to go beyond their role description to be able to even do half the stuff that they did for me. And so I just want to be very intentional for us here that the violent offender narrative, this nonviolent violence BS that has happened, I have to call it like it is, needs to stop. We need to reimagine a world where no kid ever lands in prison, and where everyone deserves an opportunity to grow, to heal. And 15-year-old Hernan deserved an opportunity to go through something more loving and supportive than 28-year-old Hernan right now, right? Like, I'm still healing from half the stuff that I went through, y'all. And, you know, it's taken time. I'm already someone who does this work. Eliana knows me, Christina, Shannon, everyone here knows me. I'm someone who just keeps it real, and I am still struggling with half the stuff that I've experienced in life. And so if it's taken me this long still to recover after 8 years of freedom from the effects of incarceration, I don't want us to keep demonizing young people in our communities as if they can't heal, because it takes time, a lot of it. And prison, it doesn't help in any way provide that, but also making sure that as we're talking about this, that, you know, representatives out there and folks who are working in nonprofits doing this work, that we reevaluate who we're actively supporting, and that it includes everyone, not just some.
We just have a thank you, Hernan, for sharing that. We have about 3 minutes or so left for questions. So one point that was made in the chat that I think is really important, and Ileana brought up a special session that needs to happen this summer so that we can address some of the things that we weren't able to in the legislative session that ended abruptly. But someone has mentioned that if we don't address educational access issues now, we're just going to maybe resume school again with all of the same problems, right, that we had before. And we're not going to be able to address those until January when session starts, which means that there's a whole other year that's going to pass with school access issues for thousands of kids. So that is the push, to have legislators include, you know, education transformation in this special session, and to have some legislation put in place.
I want to throw something out there while we have a couple of more minutes before wrapping up.
Yeah,
And this is, I tried to wait for a question that came up that made this relevant, but there wasn't one. So I'm just going to throw it out there. I wanted to share this with people. One of the beauty of the vision sessions that we've done is that they're led by the justice advisors, right? So they're led by young people who can relate to the young people that they're meeting with. And I just want, and this has always stuck with me because it was a very good session. We had a great session one day in Stanford. And one of the things that we used to do in the beginning of our vision sessions was ask people, what would you do with $100,000? And that was just to spark the conversation of, like, if you had all this money, how would you invest it, right? And a lot of young people mentioned buying their mom a house, buying a car. And some kids were like, it's obvious. Obviously, I'd get my mom a house and I'd pay all her bills. But one day, this young man, he had said, you know, I'd probably just, you know, buy my cousin a tombstone, buy my cousins and my boys a tombstone. And everybody kind of stopped and was like, wow, you know, like that kind of hit a spot where it was like, we've never had nobody say that. And unfortunately, now this young man who had said that, he passed away. But I just want people to be thinking about how this investment across the state really impacts young people, and little things like them not being able to buy their friends, or afford a tombstone for family members or friends that pass away. It's very sad. These sessions are not easy. We've been in sessions where they've went really great, and then we've been in sessions where they were very overwhelming. We've spent hours inside of facilities doing back-to-back sessions. One day, and specifically, that was very hard. And again, I know some people have probably seen the op-ed and the article that went out this morning, where I had made a statement about this is some of the things that came up in the vision sessions are things that people like myself experience on a Tuesday or Wednesday. It's not necessarily something that's surprising. These issues that are brought up in the report are not unique, and they're not rare. They're not only to Connecticut, they're national issues. And it was interesting to see people read through the notes, and some people just simply couldn't read through the notes at all, or needed to take a break and reread them the next day because they're really tough to go through. But I want to shout out my team, because I know that it was really hard to do the sessions, and sometimes you have to have a certain mental space to actually do them, and to have the conversations, and then to reread through the notes, and then to figure out what the message was and what the ask is. Like, that was very draining. And we do it for the bigger purpose, but I just really encourage everybody to loop in young people, loop in the communities that are directly impacted in your organizations or in your workspace, and have those conversations with them, because even though they're hard, they're very important. And without the vision sessions, we wouldn't be able to have put together the report or the campaign that we're launching today. So just want to shout out my team and shout out everybody that was here, and yeah, kind of leave that note out there.
Thank you, Liliana. Yeah, I echo the shout outs to all the hard work that y'all have done, listening to young people and families and the community members to figure out what it is that they need and to push that message relentlessly. Congratulations on all of your hard work, the report released today, the campaign launch. Shannon, can you please share with the audience how they can stay updated and get involved with the campaign?
Yeah, so I just want to thank everybody for tuning in first. This is very exciting. But some ways that you guys can all get involved and stay updated is following us on social media. And if you guys want to have a conversation with us, like the team, the JAs, because there's more of us, you guys can email us and go on our website and contact us. We're really open to having these conversations. We love it. And getting involved in your community, just go out into your community and find out what your people need and just dig in there and get involved.
I'd like to add, once folks do read the report, if you are interested in signing on to our campaign as an individual or an organization, there's also space on our website to do so. We'll be spending July really work planning, and this is just being transparent, figuring out what it looks like to move the campaign forward, right? What are our next steps? What are people already doing? What are we the lead on? So as people sign on as individuals or organizations, we'll be making sure to intentionally collaborate and loop them into the work that we're going to be doing moving forward.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, if your question didn't get answered, you can email me your question. My email's in the chat box. I'll put it in there one more time before we go. We really appreciate everybody engaging, all of the work you have done in your communities, the legislators that joined us today. Thank you, all of our friends, steering committee members, family members. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned, and we will see you soon.